All right, sorry for the little late start here. Turns out I'm a little sick. Please let me know if I've got desync issues once more. I appreciate it. Good timing. Audio's off. All right, good start. Audio behind. I have no idea why it changes session to session. I'm sorry. Desync is huge. Audio is behind by about a second. All right, just see if I can sort that out. All right, how about we try it now? Yeah, it's very odd. I'm about to do a little research about what might be changing it session to session, because I understand them being... It's ahead now. Oh, good. All right. I understand them being like a little latency between two different sources, right? But like, why would it shift around? All right. Clapping again. Looks good, yeah? I think I just overcorrected. Okay. Welcome back to for the next 9 days, the Quite Daily Show, live edition. My name is Theta, with an 8, and a beard, and no sleep. It was probably a mistake to sit down in my little break there. But the voice feels better. I am ready to sally forth. So, the tea was delicious, thank you. I want to start where this one begins, actually. Getting right back to it. So, let us go to a little film room here. Now, we started talking about the similarities between Shinji and his Evangelion last time, especially, even though it was first hinted at the end of episode 1. This one, the very first thing that happens is Shinji being very robot-like. Now, this is the same time that we're coming to understand, and it was revealed that Eva is not a robot by any sight. I mean, robotic elements, and maybe we'll still refer to it as a robot, but not really a robot. And yet, here we go, Shinji going in the opposite direction. But while the robotic parts of the Evangelion perhaps serve as armor, that would be your like natural assumption, right? This little robotic persona that Shinji is adopting at the beginning here is probably also for protection. Yes, they are actually technically they're like more like cyborgs. I agree, but the presentation on the outside is all robot essentially, while the inside is all biological, or it seems to be mostly biological, which is different from cyborgs where it's more clear often. And the only reason I think that's just worth picking about is because it helps emphasize the break between the external world, the thing we show to others, and the internal world, which is just such a ongoing theme. Yeah. Oh no, I like the screen too. Honestly, if the clip markers were correct, I wouldn't worry about it so much. But hunting for it while you watch is kind of silly. During the little training sequence we have here at the beginning, you have Ritsuku commenting on the way he's going through it and how he's succeeding, and she emphasizes this whole. I'll just skip ahead, so I'm not literally playing the whole episode here. He goes through routine, and she says that he does whatever he's told. That's how he makes his life easier. So reinforcing this idea that by taking on robotic qualities and distancing his humanity, this is how she believes that Shinji has gotten by. And certainly we have seen him go with the flow up to this point also. There is a implied time skip here, and we will later find out how much it is exactly. But one thing it does kind of interesting, I think, is usually when you're a new transfer student into a school, like that first day of class is a big event, right? That's like a big new people, you're the outsider, a lot of stress. I didn't show you, but last episode when he was holed up in his room and listening to the music, there's a moment where he kind of glances over at the backpack and you see inside just briefly, and it's like the new transfer packet to the school. And so you know that that's on his mind, that the new school, the new environment. But we actually, just like we skipped kind of past the battle last time, we skip past that. We skip a couple weeks into the school, or his time at school, which again is a very unusual way to do this. It's very different than the anime standard, where for some reason high schoolers are the ones tasked with saving the world, and so we invariably spend a lot of time with high school hijinks and plenty of even other kind of super robot shows are guilty of that. But by doing that, we once again, as the audience, are put into the unfamiliar. We don't get a chance to get our feet wet, to get adapted to it either. So when we actually do join Shinji in the classroom, it's still as brand new to us as it probably is to him, even though he's already been there 2 weeks. Shinji didn't just get in the robot, he became the robot. At least for a time. So that is his defense mechanism, but that doesn't mean that it always works, right? And this very robotic thing. Go through the motions, do what it is that is expected of you, or that you believe is expected of you, as a way to minimize conflict. Now, the reason we know we skipped ahead is because Misato talks about having given him a phone. All right, and the phone is one of the titles for this episode. The phone that never rings, or the silent phone, I think might be how Netflix translated it. Is that something like that? Quiet phone? It starts off as it's kind of an interesting symbol to use. It's obvious, like communication, right? Calling out. I figured he'd have friends, but I don't think anyone's called him. But a missed phone call was actually the very first thing we saw between Shinji and Misato. He tries to call her, can't get through because the lines are busy, ready to give up, right? So now, having the phone, again, this obvious symbol of communication, it doesn't ring, and no one calls it, and it's such an obvious symbol, it's not worth delving into too much, except to point out that this is actually how Shinji started this whole thing. Except he was the one reaching out to no avail. Throughout this episode, then, when he does go to school, it looks like he has opportunities to rectify this, right? When he gets outed as the Ava pilot, I mean, he did it to himself, but and everybody gathers around him, and he's suddenly the center of attention. And I probably can't find that clip, but I think you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the episode. Yeah, here it is. And the whole classroom kind of forgets the lecture and goes and surrounds him and heaps praise him. He suddenly looks like the popular transfer student. Like, this could have been his day one if he'd actually communicated a little bit. But he doesn't seem to actually get any connections from this. Right? Like, then in essence, this is him potentially walking through social ritual, but the phone never rings, right? Yeah. And the fact that yes, exactly. The fact that pretty girls ask him and wave at him, he's like, well, national security, the honey in the back, I mean, okay, realistic choice for the adolescent boy. And but it doesn't help him in this. It doesn't actually solve his real problem, right? There is despite the obvious fanfare, right? Despite how singular that is and how important it is, it actually just further separates him. In a sense, not to everybody. Certainly, our little friend Kensuke, blanking on names. Certainly, that's very interesting to him, and as it turns out, that's become that puts Shinji on his radar in a way that he wasn't before. But everyone else, that is too big, right? That is too big a scale. Now, we talked about that last time and the first episode about this contrast between the mundane, everyday, and people prioritizing and worrying about that versus the apocalyptic, giant, world-ending calamities, right? Well, the scene in which this happens, and I was lucky enough to stop on the right frame here, is happening during the first time we're getting a little bit of history lesson about what happened to make the world this way. We have this professor holding forth about the second impact, with the story about this meteorite hitting Antarctica at great speed, tilting the Earth, changing the seasons, and he's talking about half of humanity being wiped out and all these lost species. But let me back up here. Well, too far. By the way, look at the empty classroom. There's lots of little things like that to remind us of how many people have abandoned the town and so forth. But so, dude's talking about all this ridiculous things, and look at the guys in the class. This is just the background of their life, right? This isn't any more interesting to them than upcoming lunch. In fact, that's why they're bored and they start bothering Shinji about this when obviously they've had 2 weeks to figure that out. But even Shinji is not that interested in this. So here again is this enormous historical thing against this mundane when's the next class, when's lunch, when's the end of the day. But he doesn't even seem to realize this is what happened when they all gather around Shinji. And I probably can't skip right to it. But where I stopped before, the professor is, too far. Let's see. The reason the professor is not paying attention is because he actually did have personal stake in it. He talks about how where he used to live is now underwater. So he has actually kind of gone off into memory lane. It's very real and very personal for him. In a way, it just isn't for the kids, right? And you can just see how their interest changes. They can't be invested to it the same way that he is because they don't have the empathetic link. This happened before a lot of them were born or the same year they were born, I'm pretty sure. Just an aside, by the way, I don't know how many of you have seen Kill la Kill, but I've always thought that very opening scene with the guy professor holding forth, talking about Hitler, the rise of Hitler's regime and all that. I always felt like that was a callback to this scene. The presentation's so similar. Even like the cadence of the way the professor delivers. And so I know some of the same people actually probably were in both projects. But anyway, aside, it reminded me that I thought of that when I saw Kill la Kill. So it gets all that newfound popularity. Looks like the chance to make connections. He has a moment where his attention lingers over Rei once again. She's obviously in his mind in a way that no one else is, even though not much has come of it. But perhaps he simply thinks that if anyone can understand what he's going through, Rei's got to be the closest thing, right? Even if she's this weird, strange girl. At least she's been inside the Eva. At least she knows that. And so I'm sure part of it's just being, a pretty girl he once felt protective toward, but in a situation where he feels so lonely, she probably still sticks in his mind as the best chance for the next little thing. And yes, I agree. Using the exposition dump there to give us that stuff while setting up the little thing with Shinji is a great way to, again, economy of scene. Give us that information, just a little bit, just to get started, to have a sense of second impact being a thing at all, understanding why the world is different, because obviously everyone else takes it for granted, right? We don't stop the episode for that. And that is something the series almost all the time does pretty well. We talked about that last time. Then the reality of his reveal of him being the Ava pilot is not that he suddenly makes friends. Instead, he gets the ire of Toji and goes through the normal school ritual of being bullied a little bit. Now, I know it's Toji just taking it out on him and being upset and not understanding the situation, so it's not like classic bullying, but to Shinji, I'm sure that's exactly what it feels like. He has this moment where he reaches across, and instead, he not just gets the emotional pain of separation, he physically gets slugged a couple of times, right? So it would seem that he really is safer keeping it back, being the robot, right? Now, the irony of this, I'm skipping to the head, but or not the irony. Well, it is. This is actually what irony is supposed to be. Situational irony. That phone that's set up as the metaphor that is never connected, the person who actually calls and reaches out at the very end of the episode is Toji. But he doesn't answer. Even this chance for a little bit of victory, Shinji can't get out of his own way. Now, Ritsuku, I'm so sorry I can't pronounce today. Ritsuku Misato will introduce the idea of the hedgehog's dilemma over some of these earlier bits, and that forms the title of the next episode too, I believe. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But the hedgehog's dilemma, I don't have to explain this. Creatures with very advanced defense mechanisms often have trouble getting close to each other. In the case of hedgehogs, it's not just the fact that it keeps them at arm's length, but it actually is painful. But Misato has this great... Oh gosh, I wonder if I can find it. We're going to fix this clip thing by Monday. Misato has this great bit where she talks about... yeah, here we go. And they're really just kind of explaining stuff for us, which probably unnecessary. But she does have this little bit where she says that part of growing up is trying again and again and using trial and error to work out the right distance to avoid hurting each other, right? So in Misato's point of view, some distance is still desirable and required. You just have to figure out exactly where it is. And I think that says something about the two of their relationship, where she is all in pushing toward him, whereas he's kind of retracting, but she's trying to figure out where it is too. In fact, last episode is one thing we skipped past, but I was talking about her cheerfulness being kind of a mask. She, when he leaves, goes to the bath, talks about she wonders if she didn't come on too strong, if she wasn't too cheerful, right? Which again tells us it's a facade, but it means that she's aware that she might be reaching too far for Shinji. And so it's not just Shinji here who needs to work out the right distance, it's her as well. So again, the two of them have a strange number of parallels for two very different people. We're having discussion about payphones. Yes, it's because of the second impact. That's why payphones are still around. Anyway, I thought it would normally be too much to explain that kind of thing, like just introducing the hedgehog's dilemma gives us something to fix on. But I think Misato adding her own take on that actually tells us something about her. So that no longer becomes superfluous. Now, this is the first time. We have another tone shift going to this one, like 2. This is a tone shift to the high school, kind of in seeing normal, everyday things, or what should be. And we get to start meeting other high school age people. We've met Rei, but no characterization, really, right? It's just been Shinji. Now we actually get to meet some other people who are his peers. We get to see like what maybe a more well-adjusted 14-year-old looks like in this world. But is and if you weren't in the earlier stream, one of the things we talked about was child soldiers. That's something that's a kind of a staple in mecha shows, both varieties, that it's often kids who have to get into the cockpits. And there's always some contrivance for this. And what Evangelion really does is try to take what that really implies, the added horror of sending actual children into battle, into a war, and really looks at the impact on it and doesn't just brush it off as like they might die. It's not that the stakes are higher than death, but the pain can be more intense, I guess. And so the first non-Shinji high schooler we get much sense of are Toji and I don't know why I keep blanking on dude's name. Kensuke. Or Toji and Kensuke. Kensuke, for whom war literally is a game. It is literally what he's obsessed with. He is a war otaku. And that is why he takes the very risky actions later in the episode. But we went from having child soldiers and talking about that last time to now here's someone who is a child who aspires to the soldiering thing. So once again, there's this contrast between the low stakes, high stakes, right? Like here's a guy that's playing war, literally in a war zone, like the least appropriate time, okay? Like I understand suburban kids kind of playing at war when their lives are so otherwise safe and sheltered, but for him to be this into war on war's doorstep that's a step beyond that, right? And so anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. We just talked about the child soldier here, and here's a guy who's a child who kind of, I guess, idolizes the soldiering life. Maybe not soldiers specifically, but sorry for these. So I'm going to read a donation real quick, guys, from Laplace Seidel. Theta, thank you for sagacious analysis during the first session today. I'm following YouTube content for over a year now, and I want to share with you a token of my appreciation. You're doing great today, in spite of the technical issues. I appreciate it. We're gonna get past it. It's already better. So, we'll stay in the scene for a while. We'll give it a shot. We'll try changing at some point just to see if it's the same problem. But yeah, I agree. And Kensuke is actually, I feel like he's actually presented to us as a little more normal high school thing, not the war thing, but as far as like Toji's like too regressive, too hard, and Shinji's obviously like the opposite. And so he's almost like our comfortable, seems socially adept enough, but then the war obsession, right? It's just everyone in the series that we've met so far seems to have something wrong with them, right? We don't know enough about a lot of people, but like we should definitely suspect it, right? Yes, I agree. Despite the war thing, he seems like the most cheerful person. He seems, and it may be because he's into the war thing, but he doesn't seem to be ducking and hiding like everyone else. One of the very first things that happens when Toji does show up is he remarks on how empty the classroom is. And he's been gone for these 2 weeks because his own little sister was caught in the crossfire. So there's been a very personal cost to other people. So perhaps that is what it would take to be cheerful in that situation. It actually makes an interesting parallel to Misato, who was also overly optimistic and looking forward, and even gets commented on last episode when they were kind of cleaning up the aftermath. I think there's some implication that if you are super happy and content with the situation, maybe that says something about you wouldn't like. maybe you should rethink that. Yes, I agree. Casey Supersonic. The Kinski's a reminder of the fact that no one is really normal. That's true. Everybody's weird. Everybody's got their thing that is weird. But in this case, we're actually kind of looking for someone kind of normal to latch onto. Misato is such a contrast to Shinji that I know a lot of people latch onto her early on. We'll get to that though. But yes, he is definitely presented to me as the first person who seems to have some kind of comfort level with the situation, and from that seems to have a confidence that makes him able to be more social, to be willing to reach out and connect. And so, somebody tell me I'm gonna play this through. Thank you, Anonymous. Thanks. I'm so glad that the chat. I noticed the chat kept going after we went off. This is what I wanted the most. And yes, I agree. It's different for what's different for a kid and different for an adult. I played soldiers as a little kid. All right. But if I did the exact kind of behavior now, that would be a little divergent, right? The problem, again, with the child soldier thing is that adults putting children into the children themselves are the toy soldiers, right? So what does that say about the adults? Especially the ones that feel no emotional burden to it. Even Misato is the only one who's shown any kind of unease at putting them into the situation. When it comes down to it, that's what she's going to do too. That's her job. I guess that's part of being an adult too, is making the pragmatic choice when necessary. But anyway, let's see what else I got here. So later this episode, when our new angel shows up, it is named as the fourth angel, and there is a brief bit where it talks about how that they gave them 15 years between angel encounters the first time, but this time it was only 3 weeks. So first of all, this is not the second angel, but the fourth angel, right? But thank you, sir. I appreciate all your help. I lost my train of blank there. Right. World building. Today's angel is the fourth angel, not the second. And there was a 15-year gap between the one we saw in episode 1 and whichever angel came before. Telling us it's 15 years, that lines up with the thing the professor told us about second impact, right? And so even though he's given us the story about a meteorite hitting the South Pole, inside this episode, the timing lines up suspiciously, doesn't it? So it's hinted there's a divide between the story that is being told to the kids and the story that might actually be told among the NERV personnel with that 15-year date. tying some kind of angel activity to the Second Impact event. Now, the name of Second Impact means the impact, like meteorite, but we have that topped with when they are taken into the shelter, Kensuke talks about the censorship. He talks about the fact that they're hiding things from the public, that they're spinning different stories, which again suggests that there might be a divide in the actual story. There's a story that they're being told, and the story that NERV is telling themselves might be a little bit different. And yeah, I think there was a reference, I think it was last episode, and I didn't get to cover it, but there was a group whose whole purpose is to spread disinformation. In fact, when they were on the television, they talk about they're going with scenario B22, something like that. Don't quote me. It was something like that, though. And they talked about that the PR people seem to be excited to finally have something to do. So they were obviously ready, made with a lot of cover stories for this. Which means, again, although we get this hint anyway, we know one more little bit of reinforcement that the story is more complex and has more actors than we would guess. I didn't talk about it last time because we skipped forward, but that's the first time we meet the little council of people, and they name the Human Instrumentality Project. And the attitude is that, I know angels have showed up and all, but this is the actual important thing. Don't let these pesky angels get in the way of the real plan. And so, just like setting the stakes high with that first angel being a bigger deal than whatever cataclysm is around them, treating those angels as a bit of a nuisance tells us that whatever that shadow organization of their project is even more important than this supposedly world-ending, threatening event. Whatever's causing it, wherever they're coming from, whatever it is they want. All mysterious. And yet, understanding that they want to get to a certain point and will attack everything in their way, we can understand that motive. As alien as they are otherwise, it's not random to us. So we know what the victory condition is each time. So it's a great way to hold on to that mystery while still giving us progress, or letting us know what's at stake each time. Obviously not being killed by each angel, and killing the angel in turn, like what happens at the end of this episode. Victory condition, right? We don't have to know the bigger story to be invested in that. Let's see. Now, I talked about how... So speaking of the angel, I talked about how Shinji was going through the very robot-like training early on. That looked like a good defense mechanism for him, right? He's even repeating it very robotically and very like rote memorization, essentially, which I'm sure is what most of this training has been for him. So, on a total aside, but how dirty are the urinals in this school? Alright, so there's our press blackout that we were just referring to. Is this what I'm looking for? It may not be. Come here. Yeah. Alright. Here again is that council intervening. And so we get the sense, or we understand now, or not we understand, but it's reinforced that this council has some sway over NERV. Even though NERV appears to be in charge of things, whatever they are, has, and I don't think they've been named at this point, has sway over it. Even though that's obviously what they're going to do, there's this asserting of authority to make sure they know that the order came from there, which obviously irritates Misato. Anyway, I'm trying to find the robotic. Let's get to the end here. Yeah, so Shinji getting ready. He's kind of in his, obeying orders, robotic, do as he's told as he gets out there. And that's exactly what he does at first. When he gets out there, he pulls out. We get to see the first instance of the him activating his AT field to get this little bit of heat distortion right here. Come on, there you are. So now he's actually had to learn how to turn that on. But then he goes through things: center the target, squeeze the trigger, and he does it, and it seems to work at first, until the first time things go wrong. Right, the first time it doesn't go to code, he freezes, he panics, and then he runs away. So that robotic distance front that he's doing, again, there's always this parallel between what he's doing as a pilot and how he is behaving as a person. And so this didn't serve him. This robotic inhuman front cracks. In fact, the Ava itself cracks, and again, I can't just go right to it because clip's not working. But we see this, we got this moment where you can see, yeah, I went too far. You can see the armor falls off of the left hand, I believe, of the Evangelion. And the hand you see underneath, unlike the very, very cosmic horror head that we saw at the end of episode 2, the hand is extremely human. Fingernails and all, and I'm sorry I can't find it. This is so stupid. Come on. Well, take my word for it. It's very human. Are guns wielded by the Evas supposed to be indifferent? So I think earlier in this battle, they talk about trying to get past the AT field first, I believe was what her instructions were. And unfortunately I can't jump around it very easily, but I'm pretty sure that is what she tries to instruct him to do. So we saw how he could use his own AT field to erode the AT field of the other. And that appears to be the strategy at first. So let me just find that to make sure I'm not lying to you. No, she must have said it at the beginning. All right. Oh, wait. Yes. You fire the rifle as you neutralize their AT. So that's the point of the rifles, is to gotta get past the AT field. But we've seen now that they can do that. It's the reason, so far as we know, that the Avas exist. That they actually have this counter to the Angels. I guess so we're having a side conversation about Japanese. It would be nice to actually know Japanese. Okay. I mean, just in a general sense. But for analysis thing, there's only so much I can try to... I know this is a little divergence here, but stick with me. The multitude of meanings of words when used by a writer can be a real key to meaning. Can be a real key to the sort of the thematic echo, the what's below the surface of whatever is actually happening on the surface. But to not speak a language and then try to interpret from there means that I very much rely on translators, of course. But B, I can never be really sure. You should never read too much into the translated word. Next episode, I'm actually going to talk just a little bit about subs and dubs because it was relevant to my own kind of anime journey. That sounds really melodramatic, but it's something you keep in mind when you're trying to do analysis. We're fortunate. I know not all of you are native English speakers, but we're very fortunate who do speak English well enough, because English is a fantastic language to translate into because of the huge array of synonyms. Has an enormous vocabulary and lots of very, maybe esoteric, but very precise words. Doesn't mean everything can be translated and keep its connotation. But there are some languages in which it is much more difficult to translate into. So there. I made it relevant to the chat. So what that means, though, is even though there's differences between these subtitles that we see on here versus the ones everyone knew from, whichever release you watched in the past 20 years, there's only so much to get hung up on individual choices of words. Yes, sometimes it does change the meaning, but you shouldn't be trying to do specific word level analysis for any translation. Translating as an art is less about literally knowing what the terms mean, and more about understanding the cultural context they come from, and then turning around and finding a similar cultural context in the target language, which requires a lot of familiarity with both. And very few people will understand that kind of nuance in multiple languages, unless they live somewhere where multiple languages are common for everyone to speak. And there are perhaps cultures that favor one or the other, so you have some difference in culture and not just a language barrier. Yes, it's a good way to put it, Renegade. It's more about the feeling than the wording. And so you shouldn't get thing. Yeah, and Ai and Suki, other ones. Japanese use Suki for... There's a whole variety of things that can mean depending on the context. And one of the reasons I like subtitles is not even necessarily the subtitles, but being able to hear things like honorifics, because they don't always put them on screen. We don't have in English a good gradient of levels of respect or deference in titles like Japanese does. And so you end up having to cheat one way or the other sometimes. And oftentimes your sense of character relationships changing hinges on you picking up that what people have called each other is different. Two people meet and they call each other by their first names as kids. You can guess they're either very close or they grew up together, right? Where you would never have that situation come up with two high schoolers meeting. They're only going to, in English-speaking countries, they're always going to call each other by their first name. But anyway, I'll have more to say about that next time, because when I originally watched Evangelion in the 4th episode, I did watch the dub, and I didn't understand the significance of something for many years because of that. But we will get to that. Let's see. We're going a long time. I started a little bit late, but I've gone through a pretty good clip here through the notes I had. The last thing is we have a nice kind of echo. I talked about Shinji acting more like a robot, right? At the end of this episode, when Shinji is actually given the option to save himself and run, save his classmates and run, he doesn't. He runs in against all orders, against all caution, all... I don't know. Y'all tell me. What do you think? What is going through Shinji's mind when he decides to attack instead of just flee? He does the whole. He goes back in his little robot face here, right? And I think he even says, "I must not run away." But the kid's always running away, right? And so, is this him going back to that, just like the training, trying to by force of repetition, keep himself from doing the behavior he normally does? Or is he okay? Yeah, is he wanting to show what he can do? Does he have these classmates and he wants to demonstrate his prowess, be more than just the thing? I keep saying thing. English has this great wealth of synonyms, but as soon as I'm tired, I just forget all of them. But what is he doing here? The divide in what Shinji does compared to what he says to himself or what we would expect him to do in the situation is something that goes back and forth throughout the whole series. And I think it is... I don't think this is like inconsistent characterization, right? I think it's a really conscious choice. And moment to moment, and I actually like this, that moment to moment, multiple suggestions for what he anything. And I'm asking y'all what you think. All right, these are great. Oh man, these are great answers. He has someone to protect again. He's sick of running. He's been running all his life, which is true. By acting, he means something in his mind. That being acting is giving him value. So I'm sorry, I should put the chat on the screen for this. Hold on. Hold that thought. Let's see if we lose it. We get the delay. I'm gonna keep the clips on. Alright, good, they show up still. See, now if it's desynced, you can't see my face. It doesn't matter. Maybe Shinji was worried about it being discarded if he runs away. Yeah, despite the order, you know, I think he is definitely... it's funny for someone who... We start off this episode saying that his defense mechanism is to do what he's told. That's how he gets through life. And when he decides to do the opposite of that here at the end... Yes, he wins the day, but... that doesn't solve his problems, does it? I mean, he goes berserk, which again, that's like a throwback to the last episode where the robot was the one that went berserk. And so there's again him behaving like the robot, being more robot-like, in this case meant to go berserk. But after that, it's again not triumphant. He's sitting there weeping in the cockpit. If I can find that. Can I find that? Yeah. And they can see, you know, this is... they get to see firsthand how not glorious this is. How not triumphant this is. So... Yeah, I agree. Shinji has almost a note of the suicidal, the note of desperation, right? Retreating would be a confirmation of his weakness. That's a good idea. That's a good thought as well. I agree. Yeah, I hope you see what I mean. Like, these could all be true. Yeah, okay. So David Peoples talking about that Shinji does attacks. The two students go out to the battle rather than staying. The parents who stay in the city at this point, maybe the value of human life is lower. That is something that happens a lot in crises, where death seems cheap and readily available, and so holding on to life seems much more difficult, and therefore much less precious. We did have the bit with the... when they first, back in, I guess, episode 2, they were buying the... we're going to see if we desync here. We had the two women. They overheard shopping in the convenience store, and they were talking about leaving and getting their kids out of here and so forth. It is the transitions, yeah. I have no idea why. They're pretty short too. I mean, except for the Ava face one, but that one was fun to do. That one actually had a sound effect originally, and it definitely couldn't cooperate. That made like a nice robot sound, and the eyes hummed and all that. That was the first one I did, and sound didn't work. Anyway, that aside, he can't run away because he programmed himself so he snaps. Yeah, I mean, I think all that, you heard him, I must not run away, I can't run away. And then trying to go through the, hold the target in the center, press the trigger, all that. That one didn't go to code when he, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And then this time, when he's actually, the plan is to run, he, again, kind of snaps and goes and attacks. And he wins the day, but does he? Right? He's definitely animalistic. I totally agree. And I think it must be very alarming for the classmates to this shy, reserved guy who goes into this berserker rage, essentially, and then kind of collapses in pain, weeping at the end. And shows a total disregard for everyone's safety, right? Because they're running on battery power. They know they only have so much. So if you can't disable the thing in this go, they're sitting ducks, right? This is more than just being bold. This is definitely, this is beyond like calculated risk. And again, 14-year-old kid. All right, maybe not the best battlefield situation, which is why he has a commander over him. But are they? No, they are actually WebMs, so I don't know what the problem is. It was a very hasty decision. Totally agree. Oh, so the filters might be it. Well, the only filter on this one should be the audio filter. All right, we'll solve it later. I'm sorry if I can't fix it midstream. Shinji always tries to resist. He's kind of giving up himself, but maybe he feels it doesn't lead him anywhere this time, so he tries to do the opposite. As the trial and error behavior. Oh, that's actually a good thought. Like that, Misato was just talking about the trial and error of trying to figure out the distance of people, right? Like that's how you figure out the distance. You got to go through the failure. So this could be. Maybe it hadn't worked before. What he was supposed to do before didn't work. So let's try doing the opposite. That's a very false dichotomy way to look at the world, but not unbelievable coming from the put upon little 14-year-old kid. Yeah. Feels responsible for others, wants to be accepted by his dad. He does feel strangely responsible, but I think it's also a bit of a pathos for him, right? That he doesn't care enough about himself. Yeah, it's like a cornered animal. Another possibility there. Like, was he even worried that he couldn't get away? That he would run out of battery power running and be trapped anyway. Man, I just love that I get to the end of this episode, and even though Shinji has been characterized pretty well, and even though it's this early, there's still like a lot of things that make sense to me, if you watch me for any length of time, you know that I get kind of complex character. I think this series only works because of his complexity. He's not a loose cannon, unpredictable, but being able to focus so much on the struggles of getting through the apocalypse and like a day at high school, and they're so even in his mind. It's just a great way to make the whole thing relatable, not to everyone on like a personal level, but relatable in a way that the loftiness of the goal is not unreachable. The loftiness of the subject matter. I'm sorry. So you see the chance to land. Attack. Look really more confident with the docket there. Thank you. I was kind of ill, and I feel better now. But I tell you what, this is man. I like reading off the chat. I love seeing other people's thoughts on these things. That's the thing. I insulate myself from the anime culture right now while I'm doing all this thing. But I've always loved talking about story. It's where the whole idea for doing this comes from. And my voice is just a tiny one compared to the analysis of any work, and I get more out of it by seeing what other people think about it. And I hope I hope you get that as well. I hope that's. Even if I am only providing a place where you can talk about it, that would be success, right? Good question. Lucidium DM? It's the whistle. Is Misato telling him to run actually strategic, or is it protective? Or his dad would never tell him to retreat? Huh. That's a great question. Since Misato is the only person we've seen seem to have any personal stake in Shinji, as a person, which one wins out? Is it the commander in her, or is it the human friend, roommate, big sister type? Yeah, we're getting multiple answers to that, and I agree. Like it's not clear cut. I think there's probably a really good. It is a strange experience. I totally agree. Well, it's like I've normally had so much more time to think about this, and it's in more of an order that makes sense. Yeah, it's actually diverged. Sorry, but you actually spend most time writing, where a lot of the time goes, is actually editing the thoughts into a way that flows, like getting them in the right order and having one thought to connect to the other. It's not, if you just look at the script as just a series of disconnected thoughts, then maybe it doesn't seem like that, but like, if that was all it was just a bullet point of thoughts, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. I mean, you know, this is 10 minutes of notes, okay? And then me just talking off the top of my head. To actually make it flow as well as it does, because I know it doesn't always. That's what actually takes so much time. So, your Shinji, Twitch is the robot. Why can't I be the robot? No offense, Shinji, but who's Gendo in this case? Gosh, I don't know. The alter ego. now I've really gone one level deeper. Sorry for the time out there. He also overcompensates. Yeah, I definitely think that Shinji's trying to figure out where he fits into this too with his actions, right? Never mind his own personal foibles, right? And so that's why this, like, transition back over this. That's why it's interesting that he lets his guard down and weeps in front of his classmates like this, right? I think that also implies that this was a front, that this was a put on. There's a little bit of Gendo in all of us. And again, this great shot here. Man, I really wish I could skip through and just show all the cinematography. Honestly, like, that could just be the hour every time and just talk about how most of these things are composed. Why am I being judged? Because the alter ego is Gendo? Yeah, it really is. Ava, I understand, like, the rebuilds, like, just the desire to make them. Never mind telling, like, a different story. But, oh, that's what you're upset. Yes. Yeah, so the bot, I'm sorry about the, like, auto mod stuff, guys. It is... I'm trying to find the right measure there. Flying Simeon, I think you're in here still. Yeah, he tripped it yesterday, and oh, because you're Gendo. Okay, got it. I got some red glasses you can borrow. The bot is just meant to keep the most malicious of actors from being able to disrupt chat immediately. And I got to figure out what the good balance is, because, like, yesterday it tripped for him because he just wrote a long piece and it caught too many like, he was using proper punctuation and it was too much punctuation for the bot. And so that's, like, the opposite of what I want to encourage, right? So anyway, we'll keep playing with it, so don't take it personally. Anyway, I think that is most of what I wanted to say about this episode. We've gone up to an hour after all. I can't believe how fast time goes doing this, by the way. But yeah, any additional thoughts on this episode? It's again a big tone shift from what we had last episode and the episode before. Although we have a similar emphasis on Shinji's isolation and loneliness. But in different ways each time, right? In first episode, Shinji is contrasted to the world that he stumbled into and didn't know anything about, being primarily the only kid in the situation. And in the second episode, he's thrown in with a roommate that is like him and yet so very unlike him. And now he's finally among actual peers, and yet there's a different kind of isolation. And so it's not like that's the only theme going on, but if you're looking at this from Shinji's point of view, which we kind of are, all these episodes are attacking that scenario of his in a different way. Oh yeah, totally. It's definitely heroic music plays when Shinji enters the scene. It's like the super heroic music that picks up when the city rises at sunset last time. I think that might have been the only heroic music in that episode. Yeah, it is definitely a big dive into Shinji's psyche. Yeah. So Cal CD is talking about how there's an idea that music gives this idea that everything isn't terrible. I agree. There's something called the TV tropes cause, and TV tropes is a safe whitelist, by the way. The TV tropes cause audience-induced apathy, or darkness-induced apathy, I think actually might be called. And it basically means that if you always just lay it on thick all the time, if everything's terrible, your dad dies, your mom dies, your kids die, your dog dies, your car is being held together with duct tape, if nothing ever breaks your way or there's never anything to look forward to or hope for, you start to check out as an audience member, right? Like, it just seems like too much. And so walking the line between hey, there he is, thank you. Gosh, if I had a voice-activated bot for that, I would rule the world. Not really, but that is just what I meant. That you tend to disconnect. I refer to TV tropes a lot. I know you've seen that in the channels. That's a great site to just demystify storytelling, because they try to break things apart into so many different components, and you can understand how they fit together a little better. It's the difference between looking at a clock as someone wanting to tell time and looking at a clock as someone who is a watchmaker, right? Surface, they're very same, very similar, but if you know what all the gears underneath do and how they interact with each other, then yeah, you can still tell time, but your appreciation for the clock goes way further than just its use as a timepiece, or in the case of a story, its use as entertainment. Yes, and again, you're building on the same point there, that either check it out or people don't, and this is why there's such a thing as what is known as comedic relief. And the key word there is relief. By mixing a little bit of comedy into tense scenes or between shift changes, it helps keep you from getting drawn too far into that darkness, but it also makes the darkness sharper by contrast. And often humor in the middle of terrible things is that much funnier. So it's kind of a great technique that works both ways. Yes, like the penguin. Yeah, I didn't talk about Pen, but that's just such an unexpected, like, let's see if we get desynced. That was such an unexpected thing the first time I watched Evangelion, that little light melody. I'm sorry I don't know the song name off of it. My mind, that's so strongly associated with that character, that like that's what he is. He's that light little musical leitmotif that just picks up when we're having a nice moment of a nice little daytime moment, or a nice little everyday moment, right? Good book or website, Introduction to Writing. Oh man, the desync's growing. Oh man. Yeah, I think this is the first time Ray speaks other than like wincing in pain in the first one, which I'd actually forgotten she did. I thought that she we're gonna go back to the clips to watch the desync. On the rewatch, I was surprised that she spoke in that first. Hey, there's my. I tell you what, if I was a smarter man, I would figure out how to turn that into my starting soon screen and just count down. But I'm not a smart man. Yes, I actually do agree that there was a loss to Fly Me to the Moon, because Fly Me to the Moon actually it was kind of a bit of a contrast. Um, it was it caught you off guard the first time, and because it's a not only is it a familiar song sung by someone else, um, it's a obviously very famous song in English, not Japanese. And at the moment, you have no context for why in the world they choose this as the ending theme. But it's something we talked about on the channel before, if you've been over there, where soundtrack dissonance can be a really effective technique. I'm not sure Evangelion does it the best. I mean, there's some really prime examples out there. But yeah. Okay. Balbazic the Great. You know, most of y'all's names I recognize. I usually read past, like you do when you read fantasy novels, and someone's name is like something, and you just kind of pronounce them as F name in your name. And so trying to like actually sound some of these out for the first time live has been it's probably been a mistake on my part. I apologize for anyone's name I butcher. But I really like the realism in this series. For something that's so unrealistic, they do. I didn't talk about it last time, but they talk about the. Where is it this time? I think maybe it was this episode. Hang on. Yes, it was this time. She talks about how limited battery tech is. And, you know, that is actually, like, there is an enormous amount of technology in our world right now that is limited by battery tech. That is absolutely a thing that would hold up even advanced technology like we see here. And so I don't know. I like that kind of detail. I'm like that makes the world feel a little bit more breathed in, just like all of the imperfections, all of the dirt, the wear on some things and not on others. It feels lived in, and it just helps your immersion just that little bit to have a few things that are plausible, you know. So. Okay, I think that's enough for episode 3. I've run way over now. And so let me take my little break and change the... This never actually updated, did it? I'm going to change the graphic. Oh, yeah, I did. There we go. I have to manually change these graphics every time I saw it. So I'll see you back here in like 3 minutes. So... Till then. Alrighty. Gonna get my clips to the next episode, useful as they are. So we're beginning at the end here. Sorry. We're having a discussion about drinks, apparently. So this episode begins with rain, giving us a further change up in the tone, in the feel of each episode. This kind of dovetails with Shinji weeping at the end of the past episode. Kind of just parlays right into the next thing there. And we... well, where are you? found out very quickly that he has stopped going to school. So we know that the stakes for what it cost him to win the way he did last time was no victory at all, right? He definitely he definitely did not come out ahead. His gamble to disobey the orders has not paid off. And because of that, because running away turned out to, because refusing to run away turned out to not be the answer either, I think that makes it much easier for him to run away in a very physical way this time. This is not just him mentally retreating. This is not just him putting up the robotic barrier and all that. This is him actually packing his bags, actually leaving the letter of saying, "Peace, I'm out," which is, I guess, polite of him to do that, but also cowardly of him not to do it in person. And he did it too soon. If he'd hung out just a little bit longer, he would have seen that his classmates were worrying on him, came to check up on him, and once again, that misconnection, right? That being close but not close enough, and choosing the wrong course of action. And so, yeah, now there is, just as in episode 2, there will be a reference to wouldn't blame him after what happened after the last fight, so we know that there is going to be more explanation of what's coming. They once again take the timeline and split it up a little bit to let us wonder about how the fight affected him exactly. But it's really, I like that kind of in-episode structure. It's one of the things that I think gains over trying to do it all in the movies, where you don't have the natural breaks to put that kind of thing, where you don't build little small arcs inside the rest of the arcs. I don't know why this music's louder than the other one. Let me turn it down. Anyway, of course, now the truth is out that he lives with Misato, and we actually get a little more complex characterization of Toji this time, right? Because he has come to apologize, but he's so befuddled at Misato that he keeps talking over the top, and he gets progressively more annoyed at him each time he does it, and just so, and it's I think it again demonstrates that Toji's on the opposite end of social aggressiveness to Shinji, with a guy whose name I cannot seem to remember today in the middle. And so now I raised a question last time about it's a great subtle comedy, because that still right there characterizes the two of them, right? Just economy of scene. I love it. It's whatever else you think about this series, this economy of scene is excellent. Even with something that has giant long scenes where nothing happens, they become effective because the rest of the scenes make up for most times. But I raised a question last time about what we thought Misato's motivation was, and when she told him to run, someone else had a great question. It was not my great question. It was a great question. Did you think she was doing that from a place of strategic value, or because she had a personal stake in Shinji? And I can see it either way. Now, when the classmates have come to inquire, Shinji has left. Classmates would presumably be a good resource in tracking him down or knowing where he might go. I mean, if these guys came to check up on Shinji, Misato might suspect that they might know Shinji a little better than her, right? They might be an asset. But instead, she lies. She maintains operational secrecy that their pilot is MIA. And so this, at least, I think she is choosing Nerve. She's choosing her person, the captain, not Misato, the roommate, right? And so it just helps, I think, helps remind us a little bit that she's got a complicated set of loyalties of her own. Shinji obviously has a lot of focus for being so complex, but she's a pretty complex being in her own right. And so that actually kind of, sorry, I should have just kept going with my thought instead of stopping to read your thought, but you're right on it. Like, from here, the rest of the episode cuts back and forth. We keep seeing Misato with Shinji being gone, but what does she do exactly? Other than being upset at him, I mean, she's definitely both angry at him and kind of worried about him on this little exchange, right? I mean, that is frustration that it's not him kicking the door, but then much more quieter also being upset with him, which I think is actually very much like a parent reaction. There's a joke that being a parent is wanting to both hug and strangle your kid at the same time, and that's what I read out of her reaction here, that she has kind of a yes, no, I agree. They would be an asset in finding Shinji, and so it's a very deliberate choice for her to lie. And so, what are we going to do now? I talked about economy of scene, even scenes where nothing happens, and this episode has one of the first ones that's just fantastic, which is just him riding around this train, right? Listening to his music, shutting himself off with headphones, which is, some classic teenage behavior. But what it is him in the middle of humanity, in the actual middle of people going about normal day-to-day life. Like, this could be any train in Japan, right? You got people going to work, or maybe coming home from work because they have their jackets off. Kids coming home from school. A guy just reading on the train, napping on the train. He's surrounded by normalcy. He's in the middle of people living very normal lives, fitting in, doing the normal things. And despite that, he's very isolated. He sits still. The world goes on around him, right? Even to the end of the line. And so we got this passage of time here. It's very obvious what happens, but then he gets to the end of the line, and then he has to move. And so it's like he's not going to get up off the seat or join the crowd on his own, right? At least not where he is right now as a person. Yeah, music is an escapism. I mean, music's a great way to close yourself off. Head down, pose two. It all kind of works together. Music is great because it forms a sensory barrier, right? When I write and I'm out in public, you better believe I'm wearing these things to block everything else out. It definitely closes the world down a little bit closer. And going over and seeing him play with his little mini disc player, whatever, is over and over again reinforces that barrier that he puts up. Even when he is alone, even when he's by himself, it helps form a barrier, I think, even against his own thoughts. All right. Yes, he's listening to those tracks on a loop. We see him constantly back up and so forth. So it's not like he's just a music file, right? It's implied that this is a little bit of routine, just like him saying, "I must not run away," hold the target at the center and squeeze the trigger, like these mantras to help himself, or he's just trying anything. That's almost what it feels like. Yes, he's definitely, he's not relaxing. That's a great point. you see like the guy next to him. I'll advance the scene a little bit here. Everyone else is very relaxed despite the situation. You know, everyone else is kind of a nerd to the apocalyptic thing, but he is still tense, shoulders down, head down through the whole thing. Totally pulled himself in to make himself smaller. Everything about this scene, and it's really not that long, but there's no dialogue. You just see the progression until he's alone. I mean, like, we know, right? And here's him backing up, like you're talking about. And it's raining like this whole time. Right? I don't know how long that scene is in total, but it just shows the effectiveness of showing and not telling. There's no dialogue. There's nothing that needs to be pointed out. And then we see like the whole thing kind of reversed. It fills back up with people. So I guess and there's kind of like the low shots of adolescent girls. As the show goes along, we've had a little bit with Misato, but there's definitely like camera angles I think that are meant to be voyeuristic, because Shinji is our perspective character, and he is in or soon to be in the throes of puberty. There are a lot of other anime shows have used that, like Monogatari series especially tells you from the word go that you are a voyeur, and it again puts the audience closer to the character because you're getting to see what he's seeing, and maybe you react as he reacts, but it again kind of closes that thing. I'm honestly not sure that last scene even really happened, right? Yeah, well, I don't think it is in the sense that it's more like that just reminded me of it. You're right. I don't think that is what that is in that scene. Forgive me, let me clarify. That's not that. That reminded me of, we're going to get more of this as we go along. We've gotten it from Misato already. Yes, Misato in hot pants, definitely. Her sending him the picture with an arrow pointing to her cleavage is absolutely that. And that's her initiative. That tells us really more about her than about him. But sorry, you're right. That's not what that is in that scene. It just reminded me of that. That is going to be a continuing thing. So yeah, I can't think ahead. I get stuff out of order. So this works for a time. This little version of running away he's doing right now. This little barrier, little robotic skin. But eventually the train stops. Eventually it reaches the end of the line. And I can't get the sound on this, and I don't want to be one of those people that picks on it, but does he actually say he has to go home here? If anybody knows. I don't remember what it used to say, but that was definitely not my impression of what he said at the time. No. Because it seems like an odd thing, so I kind of like, God, I don't want to dive too far into that. But need to go back, kind of thing. Yeah, we'll see. I feel like going home, unless the same word can mean both, which again is a shame I don't know it. I think those are two different implications, because I think the way this episode ends, the choice of home would be very significant right here. Anyway, we're not going to get hung up on it. This is what I said we weren't going to do, but I know often, just about all of you probably know more Japanese than me anyway. So he then leaves the normal world that he doesn't fit into, and he steps into this kind of, I guess what is supposed to be a seedy nightlife. Who knew Tokyo 3, for all of its deserted buildings and empty classrooms and all that, still has hostesses and clubs and stuff, which I guess is what's going on here. And he gets on the train, but he doesn't get on the train away, right? Like, he doesn't have somewhere else to go. He didn't just leave town. He just rides around the circle line. Yeah. So I agree. The home. He says, "Good, got to go back." Yeah. I just feel like it's real. This is why you don't want to get hung up on the English connotation of a word, because home has a different meaning than going back or going to a house. So obviously being part of the seedy, whatever the nightlife is wrong. He goes to a theater and he's able to kind of zone out. This is a nice kind of quiet because just like the headphones, there's a sensory blocking. It's dark. There's a single thing to focus on that everyone's looking the same way. There is sound filling the place. I mean, theaters are very isolating. That's why they make a terrible first date. And for a time, it's working for him, right? And you see kind of other people are using it for the same thing. But what's kind of, they're not content to just show any movie here. I mean, any movie would have done. Instead, we're seeing like a fictionalized version of the second impact is what's happening in the background on the screen here. And so, yeah, it's like we have this opportunity to add a little more into the lore of the world and what it's like out here, and remind people, let people this second impact story stick in people's mind just by having this background. I mean, it almost like doesn't matter what the film is, right? The only thing that's important is that we look around; it's mostly empty. There's someone who is either down on their luck or homeless, sleeping in there, or this guy reading in the movie theater. Yeah. And for a time, see if I can cue up just where his expression is. Hang on. Yes, he's checked out again as well, right? He's got the robot eyes and the thing, his barrier up again, right? It's fulfilling its purpose for a time. He is in fact able to shut everything out once more, but theater is good for several things. Reading, I wouldn't have guessed, but sleeping, isolating yourself, and a little, private makeout session. Well, look at how he actually comes back to himself, recognizing what's going on. That snaps him out of that stupor, that snaps him out of that isolated barrier. And, in fact, his expression changes to one of, come on, sorry, I forgot they, yeah, there we go. Just distaste, jealousy. Is he angry at them breaking him out of his thing? Is he jealous of the connection they're sharing? Is romance just still such a messy, uncomfortable thing at this age? Yeah, I mean, it's very, you definitely, I think a lot of people go through a period of time where they, when you're a kid and romance just seems like this fairy book thing that people do for whatever reason. And then you actually go through puberty and you have a very different perspective on it, but it's all new, and it's all, and for a time, I feel like a lot of people, romance is actually something they don't want to see. It's actually uncomfortable and upsetting. And yeah, but see, is this just the romance part of it that he doesn't have, or is it because it seems to be a relationship that is healthy? And we obviously don't know enough about that, but they're not strangers, okay? Unless she was one of those hostesses, but probably not. Is that what breaks him out of this, you think? The fact that it's thing? Yeah, it's true. No one likes PDA, but they are in a theater, at least. But yeah, I mean, I feel like distaste is the main thing there. But does that distaste come from the fact of it being a relationship, the fact of it being romantic? Or the fact that it's just distracting him from his distraction, ruining the spell? Again, I like that I can't nail it down really easily, but that more than one answer makes sense. So that none of that seems to be work. He keeps trying to lose himself in a crowd. Mean go home or go back. Thank you for the update. Okay. So yeah, so I feel like probably if it can mean both those things, home might have been. I'm not sure. It's not what I would have chosen, but I could see it being a mix. Let's see. So surrounding himself with people, being alone in a crowd, is not working for Shinji. That new ritual, the new thing he tries here, aimlessly riding around on the train, walking through the nightlife, definitely didn't work. Trying to be isolated in the theater. He gets taken out of each time. So he decides to, if I can find it, he goes kind of, he has this kind of, there's this oppressive moment where he hears, I guess he hears nature. It was, I can't remember now what the sound is that wigs him out. But yeah, I think that's a good. I think that's a good point. That Shinji might be seeing other people be pleased with each other, and it seems so difficult and painful for him just to be close, and so it's whatever it is, he doesn't like what he sees, and that says more about him than about them. Yeah, so it is cicadas, but I think it's like they rise into like a cacophony, right? This is not like the gentle, lazy cicadas that or like the hallmark. I guess this anime is set in summer. These like rise to some kind of oppressive pitch, if I remember correctly. And I'm sorry I can't make the audio play right now, but it's definitely not a happy Shinji. Anyway, so he does the opposite. He gets away from the city. So it turns to crowd light tones. That's what it is. You're right. Thank you. So to get away from the crowds, he goes out into nature. And we don't have, again, there's no dialogue through any of this. He's just walking around. He looks over the city. There's no... other than the fact that he's wandering around and seems to be seeking this isolation, there's no peek inside beyond that. I agree. They're really painting. I get a very Ghibli vibe from these things. Yeah, he almost looks like a different character in that shot. But now he's looking down on the city and doesn't look at all like it did from the other angle, did it? The one that the sunset and all that. He changed where he was. He changed his perspective on the city, and it definitely looks completely different. I don't know if that is what is supposed to be the minor epiphany from all this or not, but I think for us, seeing that so differently, day, night, this is more nature. And the other shot, you can't even tell, I think, that there's green rolling hills back there. Anyway, that will actually come up later as well. So, yes, because he will eventually run into our friend whose name I can continuously not remember. Yosuke, right? A beard emote? I think perhaps I should wait until the channel has grown the beard. There's a TV tropes one for you. Oh yeah, that's right. We get the memory. Here is the actual consequences that we skipped over from the end of last time, where Misato confronts him about disobeying the order, about running away or not running away when he was given the order to run away for a change. And what bothers her about this conversation is not the fact that he disobeyed the order. It's his cavalier attitude about it, right? Kensuke, thank you. Gosh, I don't know why I cannot keep it straight. And then Ida, I can remember his other name. She is more upset to... Wow, I skipped right over it, didn't I? She's more upset that his excuse for it is that no one else can, that it saves other people pain, that that there's no consideration of himself. And I feel like Misato is the only person at this point who would even have that thought, right? Yes, fatalistic's a great way to put it. Helvisa. That's exactly the feel I get from that. That he has accepted his fate, and it may be that this is why he didn't run away in that situation. That might also be an explanation for things. But I think she's still trying to sort him out here too. She figures him out a little bit better by the end, but even that's not. There's no whole picture of Shinji in 4 episodes. But this statement from her that's a real, like, she's not saying this for anyone, like, this is a person who would not agree with her, right? This seems like empathy to me. Does it not? Does this not seem like, in this situation, that she wouldn't just be saying this, that she actually does realize or agree that if this process is painful for him, then no matter what else it is, then maybe he is better off. Yes, he can't make himself into the molds, and I think that scene. There's a whole series of scenes there, I know, where there's essentially no dialogue, but it makes it pretty unmistakable. He tries a lot of things. He's withdrawn the whole time. He's not actually partaking. And so he carries his barrier with him. So it doesn't actually matter that he rides around the train. It doesn't matter that he goes out into the nightlife, that he goes out into nature, that he goes to the theater, because he's still the dude hiding behind the music, hiding behind this this routine that he wears like a shield, right? Yeah, no, I like that. That's a good thought. That being reminded of normal is even painful for him at this point, because he's so not. And the crazy thing is, it's not like Shinji has some personality that's so divergent and oppressive to everyone else. He just has. It's all in here, which I know that's for everybody, but for him, it's like no one hates him by default. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could see where Misato would rub you the wrong way. I could see where Gendo would rub you the wrong way pretty quickly. Shinji is his own worst enemy here, and him refusing to actually engage any of those things he tries when he's running away is the problem. Not that he doesn't fit in them, I think. Yeah, I actually kind of wonder about him sitting next to the cliff. I feel like even it's funny for a guy who's so depressed and so withdrawn and such a fish out of water to never really, to this point, like, no one's worried he's going to hurt himself, right? Like, I don't think that's ever come up. And I don't know how intentional that is, honestly. So the potential suicide thing. He did seem fatalistic in those scenes. I think if they wanted us to interpret that as he was considering jumping, we would have lingered over it a little bit longer. Because as it is, it could just be for the view. I mean, he's kind of sitting down, not looking over. He is actually looking out and up at things instead of head down like he's been doing. But I had the same thought. Like, why put him next to a cliff, right? But yeah, I feel like maybe no one's even worried about him checking out, because that's too far. That's too much misbehavior from him. Like running away but staying inside the same city, palling around, is about as rebellious as he gets, or rebellious as they count. Yes, I agree. I think sitting at the edge is a different feel than standing at the edge, especially since he was looking out instead of I think he's kind of looking down, but he's not doing the same thing he was doing on the train, where he's buried into himself. And too much of this show is deliberate, I think, for that to just be, they wanted us to think one thing or the other. but it definitely sticks in the mind of the audience, and it might just be that this is a subtle way to remind us that that might be a threat for him down the line. That might be something to keep an eye on. And yeah, and certainly the attack seemed suicidal last time when he rushed it, but there's a lot of like we talked about then. Like there's a lot of complicated ways, a lot of complicated reasons why he could have come to that conclusion that would make sense to him in the time for his current state of mind, which is great. So anyway, let's move past that because I am yakking up a storm. So our buddy who plays at war, kind of gets his wish. He gets to hang out with the actual child soldier while playing at war, and he has this very amusing scene of acting out both halves of a dying commander, sending his subordinate on. Which again, even though it's weird, I guess, to be this age and still, I don't know, it's borderline. But it makes the dude really personable, doesn't it? I mean, like, isn't he a lot more likable for this little quirk? This is the kind of quirk that makes someone endearing rather than just like, you know. Kensuke, yes. I don't know why I can't remember that. I want there to be a Y in his name. There's not. And that's what keeps tripping me up. David Peoples, I have trouble maintaining suspension of disbelief in this whole episode. Why would Nerve let one of the only two pilots of the entire planet just quit? That's actually me wondering, too, about them worrying about suicide. I'm sorry about that. Maybe they aren't actually worried he's going to get very far. Or maybe they always think he'll come back. You know? Gendo summoned his son to become a pilot with a very curt little message and no explanation, and counted on it happening, right? Yeah, oh no, I mean, I know he's LARPing, but like, he's doing it by himself. Like, LARPing's like a social thing, right? Yeah, I mean, I feel like the fact that they all show up at the crack of dawn the next day, when he obviously didn't move during the night, I think means Nerve really wasn't letting him have free reign. I don't think Gendo is actually worried about losing his pilot, I guess, either to running away or to suicide. That's the read on I get trying to remember the only thing I know about Gendo right now. And that, I think, matches that fatalism. Like, maybe Shinji feels that same way, and this whole thing is just a big charade, just like this guy playing at war. Yes, now I agree that this gives us a first hint of Kensuke being lonely also. The fact that he has to play by himself. Everybody's got their problems. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's likely they've been following the whole time. And what is good about the scene, other than this is the very first kind of nice peer connection that Shinji gets, it's not much, right? But here's a guy who actually has interest in befriending Shinji, and tries to even patch things over between him and Toji, explaining the situation, having a little bit of fun at Toji's expense. This is such a normal way people make friends, right? This has such a normal little way of reaching out. And then, just like Misato closes the connection between them earlier on, when she talks about her own father issues, here I think this is the first time we find out that both of them don't have mothers. Yeah, your mother will be born sick. I don't have one, same as you. So he takes that shared tragedy and uses it to close the gap between them, which is very similar to what Misato did with their fathers, right? And so I think without the interruption from Nerve in the morning, imagine these guys wake up the next day and they build a new fire, and maybe without anything else to do, Shinji, I don't know if he'd be enthusiastic about it, but maybe he plays at war too. I mean, Shinji doesn't seem to really understand that he's playing. He wonders if he's doing guerrilla warfare training for reasons. But imagine that's what happens. They wake up the next day and they do something together. And that's like actually the first little seed of Shinji having made a friend of sorts in a really natural way. Right? But instead, Nerve intervenes. Right? His self that is the Eva pilot once again gets in the way of his self that is a 14-year-old boy. In this case, the Evangelion has nothing to do with it, but his role and his position still interferes with him. The high stakes keep interfering with the low stakes, but to Shinji, they're not this divide. It's just that's how the rest of the world sees it. It's part of being a kid. Or a big kid in Misato's case. Let's see. What else do I have for notes for this? There is actually a scene, I think I skipped past it, sorry, where while Shinji is out here roaming around, where Misato gets up in the middle of the night and goes into Shinji's room and just looks at it almost expectantly. And so even though she was living alone, right, she had no roommate. She shouldn't miss her roommate, I guess, or his absence is pronounced. Like, it's not realistic that he would suddenly be in the room, right? But now that he was there and is gone, she feels that absence, like a missing tooth, right? And it's not a very long scene, but I think again that's a nice way of helping remind us that Misato, despite what she said about him at the beginning, the way she chastised him, I guess, lectured him, misses him, and has a very irrational hope that he would suddenly be in his room. So I think that again helps emphasize. And she's all alone when she does that. That's her real self. That's not the mask Misato. So yes, Shinji could have had something good, but Nerve intervenes. It's definitely a pattern. And now, in this case, what does Nerve represent? Well, that's a whole different subject. But it definitely, we've had enough echoes of that already to say that having the low stakes, high stakes come up against each other over and over again is very deliberate, will be a very consistent thing. What significance does the sound Misato make after drinking beer have? It signifies that the beer was delicious. Last notes on these. Nope, sorry. 2 more notes. Right. During the night when they were having a little heart-to-heart over the fire, and the sound of the cicadas comes back, right? But this time it doesn't rise into the oppressive crowd noise. Thank you for helping me remember that a minute ago. It is instead this kind of appropriate soundtrack to what they're doing. And Kensuke, got it. And Kensuke remembers that there seemed to be more and more every year. That there weren't so many when he was a kid and used to do this. And Shinji comes back with the information that Misato says the ecosystem is returning to normal, that it's improving, that the world is coming back. And so the cicadas, just like the city rising up before, just like there are going to be other examples, there is examples of people rising back and things recovering in front of Shinji. all around him. So there is he can't be honest with himself and believe that there's no hope, that the world around him doesn't have something in it for him. But he is, as we kind of see this episode, which is why it's a nice contrast, the taking them into the woods, away from the people, meeting was kind of his first friend. I guess you can argue that, but and then the cicadas become a pleasant backdrop. In fact, a reminder of the rebirth of the world after Second Impact, and it's all there for the taking for Shinji. You know what I'm saying? So caps lock. Okay. Yeah, lots of emptiness. There's lots of physical examples of emptiness over and over and over again. And while, yes, world building wise, that tells us how cataclysmic things have been, thematically, that keeps reminding us that this emptiness is echoed in the people. And not just Shinji. Shinji's the most obvious thing. Misato, now alone, goes and checks the room. She has this kind of slovenly home life. Kensuke playing by himself. Toji taking out his frustration and anger in a really irrational way. That's just the people we know stuff about. But, of course, Shinji could also take that lesson and think, dude, even the bugs are doing better than me. So I guess you could take anything and run the wrong way with it. Anyway, missing family members. Almost everyone's missing somebody out of their life. And so let me see here. I'm gonna find us to the. Here we go. And I wonder if Misato is actually eaten up a little bit about this, the way she gives him this kind of telling off that you can see he doesn't take it very well. There's that about to lose my mind graphic that we saw right before the Berserker stage in episode 2. And then they just kind of move on to matter-of-factly, he's going to leave Tokyo 3. So I definitely don't think they were convinced he was leaving that first time when he was wandering around. Because they're very nonchalant about this, right? All the shot composition in this one's pretty great. You can spend a lot of time just studying that. I mean, you could really go through this whole thing and only look at the cinematography and how it's used to tell the story. Quite separate from the other things. Anyway, so Shinji actually is going to leave this time. His ID's clipped. He can't get back in. He only works for NERV. They only tell him where Misato is. But somebody missed him or knew he was going to leave, showed a little bit of effort, and shows up. Now, this little gesture of them coming up at the end here, this by itself, I don't think is what stays his hand. Now, you can disagree with me. Toji has this kind of weird code of honor here where he wants to be punched instead, and I get that. That's he's really doing it for himself. He's not doing it for Shinji. But afterwards, there is this right here that Toji says. This is my take. This is actually where, we're not family. Cut to Gendo, exactly. Great cut. That whole scene's great. It's this little bit where Toji's talking about that if he leaves, if Shinji's gone, Evangelion's not around to protect them, they'll probably all have to leave, right? But then they can't force him to stay. We saw what it's like for you in that Eva. And you can see how Shinji reacts to this, right? That feels like actual real empathy. That's like an actual reaching across and saying, I see your pain and I validate it. And because of that, I know it's real. I can't hold it against you. I see your pain not as a thing that interferes with what you could be or useful to me. I see your pain as a fellow human suffering, which I think is exactly what got him into the robot in the first place in Ray's situation. And so I really think that right there is what stops him from getting on the train. It's because they got to see what it's like. They no longer had that separated distance and the idealization that Kinski is putting on the whole thing. And because of this, when he pulls away and they walk up, Shinji has this reaction where he pushes past the security guards and he talks to let's see, yeah, right there, where he needs them to know, he needs them to know how terrible he feels. All right, he needs them to know how much he's internalizing this hatred of himself, and how much maybe he even always felt like he deserved that being hit, that he deserves to be cast aside. That reaching across to him, it really affected him, and he's honest with how he's feeling to somebody. Like this is Shinji pouring out like what he really feels, right? This is not the robot. This is not the facade. I'm dishonest. I'm a coward. I mean, it's a very none of these are nice things he's saying about himself. So it's not like I want to say that this is healthy behavior on Shinji's part, but the barriers came down, right? Like I think that's the somebody got through it. He did this whole thing where he's isolated and all this, and they being able to put themselves in his position when no one else could made him feel not so lonely for the first time all episode. Maybe the whole series, honestly. So while Misato and Duty and Ray, I'm sure all figures into the decision, I think that's it. I think that little pattern there has already shown up once. The significance of it changing his course of action should imply to us that this isn't the end of that either, right? Yeah, and he's getting an emotional release too. I totally agree that by keeping this, by not being honest with himself, when he finally is honest with himself, it's not something he has a lot of control over. It's not something he has experience of getting out. Has no parent figure. Now we know, right? For sure. But sometimes when you're so used to being alone, a little bit of kindness is sharp in its own way, right? So anyway, I thought it was a great... Not a lot happens this episode, but there's so much emphasis and time spent on how disconnected he is and how unknowable or what a mystery he is to so many other people. And the key moment is just his friends saying, "We saw your pain, and so we can't hold it against you." And they're like, "If you choose this, we get it. Choose it. In fact, we'll get mad at anyone who blames you, right?" Anyway, that is what I believe. I think it was the whole episode was a long setup to that, and it's not as big a deal as defeating an Eldritch abomination, right? But the stakes for Shinji are higher, right? This is the large, small stakes, and that they know how we see them from the outside is different as how they're experienced internally. I think that's not Evangelion in a nutshell, but it's pretty close. So let's see. Is that thunder? Yes, I think it is. Yeah, I think I have thunder. Mordred question. Why are the security guys really eager to dump Shinji out? They receive some order? Or does Gendo Nerve not really care if half their pilots just leave after all that trouble? At this point, I would say that Gendo is still kind of inscrutable on this point. We can definitely argue that at first, when he just decides to wake up Rei to have her substitute for Shinji, that was him just kind of goading Shinji. But in this case, he seems kind of resigned to it. Is it because Shinji is so useless that he's of no good to them anymore? Or is it because shoving him out like this is just another tactic to try, right? So what is your favorite theme that has been presented in Ava so far? Wow, that's a good question. I haven't done like a really good job of keeping up with themes. Yeah, I went back and forth on how to do this live thing. So I could do like a modified version of the normal the 5 masters thing, but I decided not to because I figured that would dominate way too much of it. We wouldn't be able to have little interrupted thoughts, and I know this doesn't flow very well because of that. But I so I haven't actually sat down thinking what is the theme to this point. But I would say the emphasis on how much more real the internal world is than the external world for someone in Shinji's position and for a lot of people in adolescence, I think it's something that is done masterfully from the word go. That's probably my favorite thing about how they have explored things so far. It's great to set all these stakes up now, and it's not like the angels we run into were not giant city-destroying beings, but we wrapped them up in an episode's time, right? The first one was kind of split across two, but letting us know all these emotional stakes and how high they are now gives you a situation where you can always build on this later and escalate action at the same time. Even if it slows things down at the beginning, all the mystery we have is going to pull us forward. And it's something a lot of series, strangely enough, a lot of the super robot shows excel at this. I have no idea why, as a medium, they make such a good platform for this. And maybe it's just because it's sci-fi, but not too different from our world, so it's not too far outside our experience. Not sure. Yeah, so here's the thing, like, they shove him onto the train, right? But they actually don't stick around to make sure he gets on it. Is he just giving him a shove? Yes, the car driving on the wrong side. See, that's actually a symbol in the way that Misato has changed from being someone in the driver's seat to being shot. I'm just kidding. One of the ideas I thought of before doing this for YouTube was now Switch was to do just really overzealous English major interpretations of things, like to just go